of course, can answer every question under the sun.
Maybe you can.
With clearly no problems. If only my kids would believe such a thing.
Yeah, mine too.
But we know everybody has questions. That includes the two of us. We all have questions. We're doing the best that we can to understand what God wants from us. So let's begin our time together with this perspective. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13, which is mostly known as the love chapter, but he adds this little twist to it, which is really important. I think it could be as important as the rest of the chapter. He says, and I'm paraphrasing now, but this is pretty close. He said, this world is like looking through a dark glass. We essentially get an unclear picture. But when we get there, that is, if you were in church today with us, as Angie talked about heaven, when we get to heaven, Paul says we will have a clear picture then. What we now see, we see in part, then we will see completely. Let's acknowledge that, shall we? Can we at least acknowledge that there are two kinds of, if I could be stereotypical here, there are two kinds of pastors who have conversations like this in front of an audience on the other side of a camera. One kind will tell you definitively that they actually do know the answer to every question, to which I respectfully would say hogwash. That's just not fair. Angie and I will do the best we can, and at best, we have a high percentage of confidence maybe in our answer. But here's the bottom line. This might be the most important thing I say for this entire conversation. I know I'm right about Jesus. Everything else, I hope. I'm doing the best I can. I'm pretty sure maybe some of the times maybe I'm 50-50. I don't know. But I know I'm right about Jesus. So let's agree that that's the most important answer to the question, whatever the question is. So how you want to begin? You want to throw some stuff on the table?
I don't know. We've gotten some questions from some of you, so we'll start there, and then I guess people can also ask their questions in chat or something.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that.
So, yeah. And first, I just want to say I'm glad that you're here, and asking questions is a good thing. We may or may not be able to adequately address your question, but asking questions is how we learn. And so it's not something to be afraid of. I don't know where you come from. Some faith backgrounds come from, well, you just don't ask.
Right.
Like it just is what it is. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're asking questions, because that's how we grow and that's how we learn. And sometimes how we even change our minds. I know I've done that over time.
That's right. We grow with God that way too. Some of my most powerful spiritual experiences have happened when I wrestled with a question with God, when I would not let it go, like Jacob of old, who wrestled with God until God blessed him. So I think we wrestle with our questions, and that's sometimes how God is able to help us grow in our own spiritual journey, not just together, but also with him. Well, let's start out with a question. I think that this question is perhaps the least satisfying answer, at least that I have. Oh, yeah, one more thing. Angie and I didn't sit down and strategize and say, whatever you say, don't say this, or we might even fight.
We might.
And there should be no question.
Get out some popcorn and get ready.
There should be no question about who's going to win if we fight. She's the winner. I'm the loser. Let's just get that off the table. Okay. So somebody asked this question. It's a serious question, and I'll just read it with all the recent headlines. I'm sure that this is not the only person that's asking this. With all the recent headlines surrounding UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, which we've often called UFOs. Is there a position that the church takes on whether or not God has spread his glory to other worlds? And is this a scheme of the evil one, or does life happen somewhere else? And here's my answer to it. Angie and I did not talk about this, so I don't, but here's my answer to it. In Genesis, we get an account of how God created the heavens and the earth. The point of the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2 is to say that God did it, not how God did it. And while we are given an account of life creating through Adam and Eve, we are not told that is exclusive. Now, I'm personally somewhat skeptical about life elsewhere, but if God wanted to create life elsewhere, there's no scriptural prohibition against that belief. And by the way, just to throw a really confusion onto the topic, if you read the early accounts of Adam and Eve, they have some kids. There's some question about where all these other people come from, right? Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. Are we alone in the universe, or are there other, beings?
I would agree with all that.
Yeah.
The only other thing I would add is I don't think the evil one has the capacity to create.
Oh, that's a
not
great
something
point.
I believe about the evil one
That's
or
a
the
great
Satan,
point.
however you want to talk about that. So if there is something else out there, I'm going to be inclined to say God created it
Yeah.
because he's the creator.
Yeah, that's a
But yeah,
great point.
we know what we know, but there could be other things out there that we don't know.
That's
that,
right.
That God didn't see fit to tell us for some reason.
And I love that answer because, we're using our phones to look at the questions people ask. So I promise I'm not checking my email here. I love that. I had not thought about that. This is how we learn from each other. God is the author of life. The evil one, the enemy, is the author of what is opposite of life. Mm-hmm. He's not the life giver. So if there's life out there, I think the theologically sound answer is to say it could not have come from the enemy. So maybe it's a fabrication of our minds, or whatever. I really don't know. But that's excellent. So whoever asked that question, I'm sure this was completely unsatisfying for you. All right, but I don't mean to demean the question. It's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Hey, several questions have come in about today's topic. And so several questions that relate to it, like what are we going to look like when we die? What are we going to look like in the afterlife? What are my loved ones going to look like? Am I going to recognize them or not? And somebody specifically said, hey, where can I go look in the Bible for answers to these questions? I'd love to, if you've got more ideas. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 places I can send you to look at. It's not going to answer all of your questions, I don't think. Like somebody said, the baby that I lost. Is that baby going to be a baby, or is it going to be a grown-up? Mm-hmm. We don't know.
No way of knowing.
There's no way of knowing. But to go and look up, because the person who asked some of these questions asked for that, I would look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15,
Absolutely.
really the whole chapter.
Absolutely.
Is a lot about the resurrection and the bodies in the resurrection. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And then Matthew 22 in the 30th area is that whole you'll neither marry nor be given in marriage part of where you'll be more like angels, where you're not married, yet everybody's kind of their own entity. So 1 Corinthians 15, Matthew 22, and I touch on a little bit of that in the follow-up video this week. So I'm not saying we don't have to do that here, but some of that I touch on in the follow-up video for this week.
I would also add, I agree, I had written down 1 Corinthians 15. That is a pivotal chapter. There are a few pieces of 1 Corinthians 15 that are a little confusing. Most of it is super clear. Paul goes out of his way to say, you can't think of heaven like you think of earth. What began as perishable is raised imperishable. What began as mortal is raised into immortality. All that stuff he says, and basically, he says it's going to be a little bit different. But one of the questions that came in surrounding this was, will I recognize the people that I love in heaven? I would add to the list that Angie gave you Matthew 17:3. Particularly verse 3. But Matthew 17 is what we call the Mount of Transfiguration, is this moment where Jesus has this encounter. And some of the old figures of the Bible reappear with Jesus, and people recognize them. So I think heaven, look, this is what I always tell people when they ask detailed questions about what heaven's like. I say, in my mind, heaven is not heaven if the people I've done my life with in love, aren't eligible to be there with me in a recognizable way. And whatever it is you can imagine as the best of heaven, go ahead and imagine that, because whatever you end up with will be better than that. Mm-hmm. Heaven will be better than I can imagine. So I think I will recognize my loved ones, and they'll recognize me. I'm counting on that. Mm-hmm. But if God has something better in mind, then that's okay too, which is the second completely unsatisfactory answer I've probably given today. I do have one that I think I can get to concretely, I think. Someone asked this question. It's a very good question. As a Christian, what is my responsibility as it pertains to trying to correct bad behaviors in other people? I know I shouldn't judge, so should I make unsolicited suggestions? I could use clarification. Here's how I would answer this question. People respectfully, I would say, people misinterpret Matthew 7, which is where we get the don't judge people. This is what Jesus said. This is from the Sermon on the Mount, most famous sermon ever. Jesus said, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And then he goes on to say, this is the clarifying piece that people often skip. They just want to do Matthew 7, 1 and 2, which is the part I just read, but listen to verse 3 and following. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when at the same time there's a plank in your eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your eye, and then, check this out, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Jesus, this is a metaphor, right? It's a word picture, and it makes sense. It's an exaggeration, which preachers are prone to do. There's a speck, little tiny.
I don't ever exaggerate.
You don't ever exaggerate. There's this little tiny speck in one person's eye and a log in the other person's eye. It's literally intended to be an outrageous illustration. But the point Jesus makes is, don't leave the speck in your brother's eye. Just examine yourself first before you try to help him. Otherwise, you end up with hypocrisy. Or as my mom would say to me a few times when I was a kid, do as I say, not as I do, which is what Jesus is talking about here. The point is, it's incumbent upon us as brothers and sisters, as followers of Jesus together, to try to help each other. People around me, including Angie and others that I count as friends, but more than friends, people who are helping us journey together. We're journeying together towards Jesus. They make me better by pointing out the speck in my eye. If they don't do it, who's going to help me? So the idea that we should not evaluate, help each other be better, and we throw our hands up and say, well, I'm not supposed to judge, so I guess I won't say anything about something that you're doing that's not right, it's silliness. On the other hand, this, what Jesus talks about here is he says, he talks about your brother. Mm-hmm. People, I don't go where I'm not welcome. Jesus is not suggesting that you tell everybody what they're doing wrong unless they are giving you permission or inviting you into that. So I have this tool that I use that I will say to someone, I noticed something I thought might help you in you, but I don't want to overstep. Are you open to me sharing that with you? And I say it kind of just like that. I'm asking for their permission to share something in their lives. A couple of times I've had people say, no. Okay. It's okay. Really, it's okay. It's your life. You don't have to hear my opinion if you don't want to, but I'd love to help you if you would. And I also, before I get there, I'm very conscious of my own stuff, and I want to make sure that I've examined my own heart in this. So it's not your responsibility to point out everybody else's sin. However, it is our responsibility to help each other where there's an open door for that. What would you say?
Yeah, I think that is great. And the only thing I would add is I think there's also a difference in talking with people who are Christ followers and people who are outside
Absolutely.
the faith. And I think in some of Paul's letters, you'll see sometimes he'll tell people, you need to speak the truth in love. You need to hold each other accountable. But that's in the context of community and shared faith.
That's right.
I don't see, just going out and just judging other people out there. However, if we're in the church, and we're in community and we have trust,
yes.
and it matters. How I'm living my life matters.
Yes.
How you're living your life matters. And we owe it to each other, but also to all the people around us
yes.
to help each other be the best that we can. But we have trust, we're in community, and we have a shared faith. And
That's
I think
right.
that sometimes where we get in trouble is when we step outside of, if we go to people we don't have any trust with, we're not in community with them, we don't have a shared faith with them, we just go judge them. Well, I think that's where we get in trouble.
Well, and it leaves a bad taste in people's mouth because they're like, well, who are you?
Right.
And who gave you the right to talk into my life? So even among, I think the community is a really key piece, because even among people who might claim that they follow Jesus, they might see the world in a very different way. And if we're not in community together, we haven't earned the right to speak into each other's lives. And by the way, that goes in reverse too. The people that are closest to me, they know they have permission to say, I need to tell you something about you. As a matter of fact, I'm counting on them to do that. But if some stranger walks up to me, which, in case you don't know, does happen, and wants to tell me about what I'm not doing right, I might listen politely. But if I'm being honest, I'm thinking, who are you? I don't know who you are, and I didn't invite you to tell me about all my life flaws, whatever. Related to this is someone asked this question: how do we respond when we are asked to embrace things that we know to be sin? How should we respond? And this is a loose reference to lots of the things that are happening in our culture today that historically Christians have seen as not what God wants, not what God wants as the best for our lives. This is what I would say to the person that asked this question or anybody wondering about this. I get to live my life however I want to live it. I get to choose how to live my life. I'm the only one who can choose how to live my life, and here's good news for you. You get to do the same thing. No one can make me claim that something is right that I think is not right. But I don't get to live your life for you. So to the actual words of the question that came in, how do we respond when we are told we have to embrace things that we know is sin? My response is, no, I don't. I don't have to embrace what I think is wrong and call it right. I don't have to do that. I also don't have to, and actually I would argue I don't have the right to behave badly in my rejection of this idea as right. Does that make sense? If I believe that this over here is wrong and everybody's telling me I have to say it's right, I don't. I can say, no, this is not right. But I don't have to misbehave or behave badly as I respond to that. Oftentimes, in the world we live in this culture of conversation, I do a whole lot of keeping my mouth shut, but I have a whole lot of people knocking on the door of my office or emailing me and saying, could you help me work through this? Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, they're giving me permission. And I'll say, sure, I'll help you work through this. Because people are really wrestling with some of these things today, as you can imagine. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. I would say, no. I mean, I would agree with, nobody can make you say you have to have integrity about what you believe. And we do everything in love.
That's
so
right.
it's just another way of saying you don't have to behave badly.
That's right.
You can have convictions about something being right or wrong and still behave with love. And it goes back to the question we just had. If you don't have trust and you're not living in community, you don't have permission to go tell somebody that they're right or wrong.
That's right.
Now, if they're pushing you to say what you think is right or wrong, then you act in love and you are a person of integrity.
That's right.
And that
And I think the phrasing works well. I mean, it's easy to say, listen, it's okay. You can believe whatever you want. You can live however you want. I'm not mad about that. But it's also fair for you not to be mad at me for believing what I feel I'm convicted about. For a scripture reference here, I would give at least the one that quickly comes to mind is John chapter 8. Jesus is confronted by this crowd that drags this woman caught in the act of adultery in front of him. And it's a super compelling story. You should read it if you don't know it. It begins with the last verse of chapter 7, which is like 53 or something. It goes to 8, 1 through 11, chapter 8, 1 through 11. And in that chapter, they want Jesus to basically condemn this woman to die. And Jesus bends down and he gets on the sand. He sits down. He begins to write. We don't know what he writes. I've speculated at least 3 different ideas of what he writes, but we don't know. And they have rocks in their hands. They're ready to stone her to death. And all we know is that as Jesus writes, he says, "Let the one who's without sin be the first one to cast a stone at her." And they begin to drop their rocks. The oldest ones first, then the youngest, until no one is left except Jesus and this woman. And he says to her, "Where are your condemners? Has no one condemned you?" And she says, "No one, sir." And then he says, "Go, leave your life of sin." And in this moment, Jesus does what I hope I can learn to do. He names sin, and refuses to condemn at the same exact time.
And he says that, neither do I condemn you.
Neither do I condemn you.
Now go.
Now go and leave your life. Did I not say that? If I didn't say it, I meant to say it. He says, neither do I condemn you. Now go, leave your life of sin. Mm-hmm. He does both. I don't always get this right, but I want to get it right. He doesn't sacrifice his integrity. Mm-hmm. He calls it what it is and also refuses to condemn her at the same time. It's the most beautiful truth and love moment, I think, in the whole Bible, or at least one of them. So there you go. All right. Here we go. If other religions such as Buddhism do not claim a God or believe differently, do we believe they are condemned? Oh, good. Let's have you answer.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, again, I would say we know what we know. And so the only thing that we can operate on is what we know. What I know, what I'm thinking here is Jesus saying, you know the way to the place I'm going. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's what I know. So I believe Jesus is the way to God. But as we mentioned earlier, I don't know everything. And God could be at work in other ways that I don't know. That's a risk I'm not really willing to take personally. I'm going to act on what I do know, which is Jesus is the way to God. And God could have created more things than we know about. God could be at work in ways I don't know about. But all I can do is act on what I do know about.
I agree. I'm going to bank on. I'm betting on what we do know. Jesus in John 14, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." He said these words: "No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, I had a seminary professor who believed that he made the case for when we die, we have another chance to claim that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and therefore we get access to God through Jesus. And whatever. I'm not sure. I've got that. Here's what I do know. I don't know why you'd want to gamble your eternity not on Jesus. But as Angie alluded to in the message today, she honored me by sort of quoting me. When I get to heaven, if the person that asked this question, if the Buddhist is in heaven, I'm not going to file a lawsuit. I'm not going to put a complaint in the complaint box. I'm going to celebrate that they are there. God is God, and here's the really important thing for all of us to know, who are those of us who are Christ followers. Eternal destination is above your pay grade, and it's above my pay grade. I don't get to decide. God's not asking my opinion. I don't get a vote. I got to just go with what I know. So for everybody who's wondering about this, my strong suggestion is that you give your life to Jesus, because I'm sure of that. And the rest, I don't know.
All right, another question has come in. How do you help someone who you've tried to help over and over, but they won't help themselves?
Well, doesn't the Bible say God helps those who help themselves?
I don't know. Can you show me where that is?
Oh, yeah. See, that's one of the most misquoted scriptures. The Bible, by the way, does not say God helps those who help themselves. At the same time, it is easy for us to, particularly with someone we love, to move into this phenomenon that we call overfunctioning. Now, if I could just have a little bit of leeway here, in family systems, we use the terms overfunctioning and underfunctioning, which is somewhat of the question. More commonly, you'll hear the word enabling, right? I mean, the problem with the word enablement, which I don't use, is that it puts all the blame on the one who's doing all the work. But really, overfunctioning and underfunctioning go together. They're in total balance. You can't have an overfunctioner without an underfunctioner. You can't have an underfunctioner without an overfunctioner, and they go in equal balance together. And so in that way, they're sort of feeding on each other. The underfunctioner gets all the work done for them. The overfunctioner gets to be needed but complains about it. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. So if we really want to help somebody, the way that we do it is we give them responsibility for their life. We respect them enough to say, hey, you can live your life however you want to live it. This is how much I'm willing to help you. And if you want to live in a different way, that's okay. The problem is that we try to own their decisions, and you have to release their decisions. They get to do whatever they want to do. They get to live their life however they want to live it. You're not responsible for that. You can love them and also give them their life back.
And that's really hard. But I agree with all of that. It makes me think of a story we've taught here before. Jesus asked, the invalid lying in John 5, do you want to get well? Mm-hmm. And that's a pivotal question. Do you want to get well? I think we all know people. When I read your question, I think we all know people that we want them to be well.
That's right.
And that could be physically, emotionally, relationally, substance abuse. That could be all sorts of things. We want them to be well. But the question is, do you want to get well? And if the person doesn't want to get well, then you can keep trying and trying and trying. But as Brian said, the more you try, probably the less they're gonna. And because that always balances out. And that's really hard. It's really hard when you care about somebody and you want them to be well more than anything. But Jesus asked them, do you want to get well? And then when the person says yes, then Jesus takes action.
We could do a whole entire hour about this, but let me just give you one illustration that's real life. I have a good friend, and all of her kids are grown, but one of them has had a hard time kind of growing up, and so she pays for her adult son's bills, a lot of them, And every once in a while, she'll call and kind of vent with me and say, but she always gets to this line. She'll say, I just can't understand why he won't pay his own bills. And I say, well, it's not to understand. As long as you pay them, they're never gonna. And so we have to be willing to release that. So what if they're probably not going to live without a phone for long. They'll get the phone cut off. They'll get it cut back on. They're probably not going to be homeless. They'll eventually, get a job and pay rent and that kind of thing. But you have to be willing to let that go. At some point, we have to recognize that this person has responsibility for their own life, and we actually hurt people when we overfunction for them. We think we're helping them. We actually hurt them along the way.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's see. We've got a question coming in before it's ready. One question came in about something about the Bible and science. And so without tackling any specific question, I just want to say, generally speaking, this is just a personal pet peeve of mine. We've never talked about this. I hate how in our society everything is either or, everything's a fight, and so many things can be and. That's my general approach to the Bible and science.
Yes.
I don't approach the two of them going that they're going to be at polar opposite ends. When I'm looking at science and I'm looking at the Bible, I'm looking for where is the and.
Right.
Because again, if I believe God is the creator, then I believe God created the science in so many cases. And so I'm not looking at that and going, oh, well, if that happened, then it can't be God. I'm thinking, oh, God created that system, if that makes sense. So that's just a general overarching statement that it's easy in our society to feel this, like you have to pick a side.
Right.
This science is just one topic. But again, a lot of the beauty is found in the and.
And there are plenty of renowned, very smart scientists, biologists, chemists, physicists, doctors who are people of faith. Most at least many scientists would say that they would say with integrity, I have to say that science doesn't answer every question. So I don't think I'm in total agreement with Angie. They do not have to be in conflict with each other. We've pitted them against each other. Humans have pitted faith and science against each other, but I don't think God ever intended that to be that way. What are your thoughts on dreams, vivid dreams that lead you to think you should do something or warn someone of something? There's no doubt about it that God spoke in both the New and Old Testament through dreams. He spoke through Joseph in Genesis, vividly through dreams, visions that he gave him, prophets that God gave visions to. Isn't it Acts chapter 2 that says your sons and daughters will dream dreams? Yep. Isn't that Acts chapter 2? I think it is. Yep. Certainly in Acts. I think it's Acts chapter 2.
Yep.
So God does speak this way. I think the trick is not, for me, it's not in the answer of does God speak this way. Here's the real problem with the dreams is my dream because of the Mexican food I ate tonight, or is this a word from God? And I think that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. And I'd like to tie in another question with it. Someone asked this question. They said, why do some people experience discernment, strong gut feelings about things more than others? Discernment is a spiritual gift. So in 1 Corinthians 12 and in Romans 12, we are taught that God gives every follower of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, imparts on us at least one spiritual gift. Some people just have an elevated giftedness in different areas. Paul goes out of his way to say that God arranges the body the way that God sees fit so that the whole thing works well, okay? Some people have the gift of discernment. They just have a knack for it. It comes from God. And here's how you know if it comes from God. I'll be interested to hear Angie's take on this. Here's how I think you know if it comes from God. If you're more right than not, that's probably an indication that you're gifted, that this is a gift for you. However, if you run around telling people God gave me this in a dream, and what you're telling people never comes to be, do you know what happened in the Old Testament when someone claimed to be a prophet but their prophecy didn't come true? Do you know what they did to them? They killed them. They executed them. In fact, the Old Testament goes out of their way to say, listen, if a prophet claims to be a prophet and they're not really a prophet, you just take them out. So I want to be super careful if I'm going to blame a word from God on God. I want to be very clear that I've got this right. And I think people who really do hear from God often in dreams earn a reputation of. I've got a few of these people in my life. When they walk in I've had this happen several times where a person comes in my office and says, "God gave me a word for you. I don't know why, but this is what God wanted me to say." And when that person was right the first time, you can say, "Well, maybe they just got lucky." When they were right the second time, your eyebrows are raised, like your radar's up. When they're right the third time, you're inviting them back.
Right.
And there are people like that. And that's my best answer to the question.
One other spiritual gift is prayer. And I can think of two people who sometimes will they'll just text me and say, "I felt led to pray this for you today." And whenever that happens with these two, I'm like, oh,
That's right.
that was what I needed today. So again, you pay attention to that. Yeah, I think so. And I'll do a shameless plug for Bible Track. In Bible Track, I do a session about authority. And I think, so some of these dreams, that's kind of a personal experience kind of hearing from God, which I think is valid and needs to be weighed up against the Bible. So whatever the dream is or the experience, does it match what we know of God in the Bible? I think that's a good litmus test. And then, and does it match what we know of how God works with people and the world? And it's not a clear yes or no, but it's a good, it's a good kind of metric, I think, to hold it up against and measure up.
Okay. Why do bad things happen to children? Well, I have good news for you. Next Sunday, a week from today, I'm going to deal with the topic. And as we wrap up the series, I'm going to deal with the topic, why do bad things happen? Why is the world so broken? If God is so good, why is the world so bad and life so hard? I'm actually going to address that question then. And I think the question is really not limited to kids. It's limited to all of us. Why do bad things happen? Why is life so hard? I just got back from Tanzania a few days ago, and I may tell this story again on Sunday. You just forgive. You can just act like you never heard it before. But I get on the plane. We have this brutal travel. So I'm probably talking half our population out of ever going to Tanzania. It's super hard. It's great being there. It's really hard travel. So I get on the plane, and we'd already been traveling for half a day by the time I get on the first plane ride. It took us 40 hours to get home, and I'm griping. I mean, I got a really bad attitude. I'm griping. Like, man, this is ridiculous, and it's plane ride, and blah blah blah. It's got this awful attitude. And I start thinking about these women who carry these massive bundles of potatoes on their heads for miles to get to the market so they can make $1 today. That's not an exaggeration. $1 today. Competing, by the way, with lines of women all trying to sell potatoes. So they can make $1 so they can buy enough food to barely eke out some sustenance for them and their children. They do this every day with no hope of it ever changing. And I'm on this plane, and I'm griping about how long it's going to take me to get home to my climate-controlled Chick-fil-A frozen pizza life. And I hear God say to me, "What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? You're really going to gripe about this?" So I spend most of the journey home with this fight. Literally, I feel like I got the devil on one shoulder and God on the other shoulder, and they're both speaking into my ear, and God's saying, "Man, you got to get yourself together." Life is really hard for a lot of people in the world because the world is broken. And we're going to deal with that on Sunday, and that's an unsatisfactory answer to your question, and probably Sunday won't be a satisfactory answer, but I'm going to deal with it more in depth then.
Well, and the truth is, when you hear about the awful conditions that people live in and the things that happen there is no satisfactory answer to that.
Yeah.
But you'll do that. And, the children thing is extra hard. And it's extra hard for us. And I think it was extra hard for God, too. I'm looking at, Matthew 18, where it says, "If any of you cause one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it'd be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned." And so I think we have a hard time when kids are harmed and hurt. And I think this lets me know Jesus doesn't like that either. That's not satisfactory. I know. We just don't want the bad things to happen to kids.
I'll also add to that I can't answer the question completely, and I can't solve the problem completely, but I can solve the problem partially, which is why we went to Tanzania, which is why we go to Belize and Moldova, which is why we help people in our own backyard, which is why we invest so much in kids, because we can't make a difference in everybody's lives, but we can make a difference in a few people's lives. And I'll share more about that also on Sunday. I think we do what we can to help.
Okay. Question here. What happens if someone has a change in heart about God? Maybe later in life their faith is not as strong for lots of reasons. Maybe they have a disease or an injury or dementia. So, I mentioned today, Jesus is the one who knows everything, and he's the one who judges. So if someone has a disease or an illness or dementia, Jesus knows that better than any of us.
Yeah.
And I think as much grace as he has for a criminal who's being crucified for committing sins, if he's got grace for that guy in his last moments, I can only imagine there's abundant grace for someone who maybe, is saying all sorts of things about faith at the end of their life. But again, if there's a disease or injury or dementia, Jesus knows that. He knows it even better than whatever we can see.
My great-granddaddy he had some kind of dementia. I only remember him a little bit. I was a little kid. But he was a great man, a man of faith. And you'd walk in the room, he'd be lying on the couch, and he would cuss. And my granddad, who I was very close with, my granddad who led me to Jesus, he would just laugh and laugh and laugh. I thought it was the strangest thing. Like, what is happening here? He had lost his mind.
Right.
And God's no more going to judge that than he is of, somebody who had a disease of their body that didn't lose their mind, of cancer or anything else. I mean, so I think that's a different answer, at least a potentially different answer, than the person who is a person of faith, claims to follow Jesus, and then later just recants their faith. I think that person is, if I'll just cautiously say, is in more peril. God, like I said earlier about, I get to live my life however you want to live it. You get to live however I want to live it. You get to live your life however you want to live it. God designed us so that we get to choose him or not. Somebody, when we were designing the series, asked a question about the tension between free will, faith and free will, and God allows us. This is the whole thing that makes human beings, or one of the things that makes human beings created in the image of God. We get to choose, and God is going to respect that choice. I believe God will respect the choice. So if you reject who Jesus is, some of the Christian community would look on your eternal destiny as a punishment. But what Angie said today was, I don't know a lot about hell except that what we do know is it's separation from God. Does it include, lakes of fire and burning sulfur? No, I don't know about all that stuff. What I do know is that it's eternal separation from God. How do you get that? You say that's what you want. You say, I don't want God in my life, and God is going to differentiate. He's going to say, okay, if that's what you want, I'm going to respect that. You get to choose. That's at least the case that I would. God's never going to force himself on you. There's not one piece of evidence anywhere in Scripture or in the life of Jesus that he forced himself on you. As a matter of fact, in John 6, verse 66, people willingly walked away from Jesus, and Jesus let it happen. He respected them to make their own choice.
I'm thinking of James 5, verse 19. My brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring him back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of his way will save him from death and cover over a multitude of sins. Which says to me, if we know somebody who wanders from the truth, that's a person who did have the truth and they wander away, then we try to go back and get them with gentleness and love and all the things we've said, but we try. I mean, and again, if we care about each other and we're in community, then we can go back and say, hey, come back. And, Brian jokes all the time that I'm old. I've been around here long enough now to watch people do this, to watch people be excited about their faith and wander away. And I've gotten to see some of them come back, some of them be brought back. And there can be a lot of beautiful redemption there. It is possible. It is hard.
It is.
It's hard.
And it's hard to be on the side. I've not always done what Angie said. I just, I'm just confessing. I've not always handled the people walking away from their faith thing well.
Well, it's hard.
It's hard. It's hard.
When you care about people and you watch them do something destructive.
Yes.
It's hard.
Yes. When someone close to you dies, do you think they can still communicate with you or to you? Well, there are a couple of texts in the Bible that people could make an argument with to say the answer is yes. There's the Lazarus dies, right? And he reaches across the abyss and says, the dude dies. And he says,
Right.
Abraham, just wet this.
Right. It's a story.
I
that
can't
Jesus
remember
tells, yeah.
exactly where it is. There is some very minimal scripture you could use to argue this. But let me give you my take on this. People ask me this a lot. And for anyone who has recently lost a loved one, this could be a little triggering, and it could sound a little insensitive, and I don't mean it to be at all. I think about my mom almost every day. She's been gone for a little over 2 years now, and I think about her just about every day. So, and that was the closest death for me. Is super hard. But here's the thing. So when someone loses a loved one, part of the way we bring comfort is we say things like, and maybe you've said this, I'm not trying to be offensive. I know she's looking down on us right now, and she's, or I know she's protecting me, or, and some people will say, as a way of coping with our grief, we'll say, I go to the graveside and I talk to him every day. But I want you to imagine heaven with me for a minute. This is the conversation at church today. I want you to imagine heaven. Heaven being all of the bliss, all of the joy, all of the best of everything you can imagine. Picture this with me now. But you can look down and see your loved one moving on with their life without you. Not being able to engage with them, not being able to do life with them, not being able to speak into what they're doing. Does that sound like heaven to you? Because it sounds like torture to me. So the answer is, at least my best answer is, I don't think so. I think when we die, Jesus said to the thief, to the guy on the cross, as Angie quoted today, he says, today you will be with me, where? In paradise. There, not here. I don't think our loved ones who have died can see us and watch us live our lives. I think the reunion happens after we die, and that's it. Maybe I might be wrong about that. What do you think?
I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything that would definitively answer that one way or the other.
Yeah. Why do some people receive healing while others do not? What a great question.
We've all wrestled with that question at some time or another, and we've all prayed for people to be healed who aren't here anymore, right? And so that's another one of those times that, for me, insufficiently saying, we pray and we believe, and then we trust. Elijah's in the other room over there. He did a message a couple years ago. Even if I don't get the answers to my prayers, even if things don't turn out the way I want them to. And so I think it's hard, and I don't know, and I don't know that we're going to know why some people are healed and some aren't.
I also think that theologically it's important that we grasp this as followers of Jesus. We say this phrase, well, life's not fair. Jesus did not come to bring fairness. He did not come to, if you think about the way that he operated his ministry, he went to this village, but he didn't go to that village. He healed these people, he didn't heal those people. And in doing so, it wasn't so much that Jesus was saying, I don't want to heal you. As much as a human, his limitation was, I'm confined to space and time, and I can only do so much. But in any event, the example that Jesus brought for me was, at least part of what I see in his example is, Jesus didn't come to bring fairness. There were people that wanted to be part of his inner circle that he said no. He made the decisions that he made. Just like Paul said, God arranges the body in the way that he chooses. You don't get to be an eye because you want to be an eye. You get to be you're an eye because God made you an eye. And this is a foot and this is a whatever. God's in charge of that. At the end of the day, we are all eligible for healing, and we all can experience ultimate healing. But here, we don't always get that. When I was in seminary, they brought in this guest professor, and his name was Frank Tupper, and I will never forget this. I always found this fascinating. He said, "We all know that God usually does not intervene with basic laws of physics." He said, "I can prove it to you." He said, "I will watch people stand at someone's bedside of a person who's riddled, eaten up with cancer, and going to die any minute, and they will pray that that person be healed. But if I cut my arm off, no one ever prays that it grows back." He said, "I've never heard anybody pray that my arm would grow back." Why not? Because we know that just doesn't happen. Not that God can't, but just that he hasn't. So in this way, we know we can count on generally speaking, that God is not going to intervene with the normal process of life. He does occasionally. That's what we would call a miracle. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, he doesn't. One last thing about this. When I was a young kid, my grandmother had a massive stroke. My grandfather, who was the closest person to Jesus I ever knew, the one who led me to Jesus, believed that my grandmother would be healed. He believed she would be healed. And he would say, "I know what everybody means by this, but I believe God's going to heal her on this side of heaven." But she never was healed on this side of heaven. And what my granddad was able to do was to say, "I'm going to believe this, but I'm not going to I'm not going to jeopardize my faith in it. And if it doesn't happen, I'm not going to blame God for it." He was solid in his faith that way, and I've taken my cue on that from him. God can do what God wants to do. At the end of the day, I'm going to trust him no matter what, which is what Angie said a minute ago. Okay. A couple more, maybe?
Yeah. One question came in is what to do with the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount and how we use them. So I would say Ten Commandments and Sermon on the Mount. I mean, looking at two of the most famous passages of the Bible, one Old Testament, one New Testament. And I'm not a throw out the Old Testament kind of person. That's not me. I think both have authority in my life, maybe in different ways appropriate to what they are, but both authoritative to me. I will say, I'm going to lean heavily on the Sermon on the Mount, and the day that I'm fully able to live out the Sermon on the Mount will be the day that I'm probably not alive anymore. I mean, if I could just get those chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7 right, my life would be different. I think that'd be true for most of us. There's so much there about how to live. And also, Ten Commandments, there's some great stuff there. Having God first and Sabbath, and I follow those things too. Mm-hmm. So I think they're two great pieces of scripture to kind of hang our faith on. We don't have to pick one or the other. I talked about earlier, it's not either or, it's and. So I'm going to say yes, use both. I'm probably going to lean a little on the Sermon on the Mount. Personal preference.
Oh, I think I will too. As a matter of fact, Jesus' commentary, he offers a lot of commentary on the Sermon on the Mount, and in a way that expands it and enriches it. So Jesus would say, "You have heard it said, you shall not commit murder." He's quoting the Ten Commandments, the commandment. But then he says, "But I say to you, if you have anger towards your brother, you've already broken the commandment." Right. You have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already broken the commandment. So at the end of the day, and so I'm going to quote somebody who often is accused of throwing out the Old Testament, and he would, that is not accurate. But Andy Stanley wrote a book called Irresistible, and in it he deals with this tension between what Angie's talking about, leaning into. I'm going to lean more into the Sermon on the Mount. Andy Stanley's argument, and by the way, I would highly recommend that book. He is not arguing that we ditch the Ten Commandments. What he is saying is that what Jesus came ultimately to say, "A new commandment I give to you: you should love one another." This is how the world's going to know you. If you can live into what Jesus defined as the first two greatest commandments, to love God and love people, then all the rest of it takes care of itself. I mean, it is already embedded into the idea of loving God and loving people. If you actually achieve that, you won't have to focus on not murdering somebody, or not being faithful, or not telling the truth, or not taking what doesn't belong to you. All that stuff gets dealt with in those commandments. Not that we should ignore, but that we're focused on the wrong things. And many times I think what happens is somebody gets the 10 Commandments out, they check off all the boxes. They're still living a horrendous life, but they think that they're right with God because we check these boxes, which was never the intent. So I would agree. If I had to pick, and we don't have to pick, but if I had to pick, I'm going to spend my life trying to model the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah.
Well, and I'll circle back to the Sermon on the Mount in a minute. Follow me to get there. Somebody else wrote in and said, "Hey, why is the Book of Revelations so hard?" First, this is on the house.
Here we go.
We go. I don't know who said this, so I'm not trying to call anybody out. It's the Revelation of John. It's not the Book of Revelations. So that's a really common thing that people say. But now you know. Revelation. It's so hard because it's a different genre of writing than anything else we have, really. Maybe some pieces of like Ezekiel, maybe I don't know, could go there. But it's apocalyptic literature, so it's not like the rest of the Bible. It's not like the rest of the New Testament. It's not story or narrative writing. It's not a letter like much of the New Testament is. It's a whole different thing, and it's not a kind of literature or writing that you and I read on a regular basis. So that's why it's hard, because we don't ever read it. We're not used to it, and we don't know how to read it. And I do think it's important. I've read it. I even took a class, you've mentioned seminary. I took a whole class in it in seminary because people are so fascinated by it. Like, I personally am not fascinated by it, but people are. If I'm going to serve people, I figure. I took it in Greek. We had to translate the whole thing.
No, you didn't.
We had to translate the whole thing from Greek into English. It's a semester of my life I'll never get back. But so I have studied it, and I've done that. And so when people have asked questions, I have been able at times to point them in the direction of things. But my general overarching statement would be, I do think we make too much of it. And again, if I could get all of us reading the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and trying to live that out versus being caught up in Revelation, I would totally take that. And I just want to say, Jesus himself was clear. We're not going to know.
That's right.
We're not going to know when and how all this end of the world stuff happens. And if Jesus says it over and over again, then that's what I'm going to take. I'm not going to try to read Revelation and figure it all out. I want to take Jesus at his word. We're not going to know. And I want to focus on what teaching he did give that I can understand and can live out.
Yeah, I would completely agree. People get really obsessed with Revelation, with answering every question and, look, there's the Antichrist and there's the Antichrist. By the way, Jesus said, people are going to say there's the Antichrist, don't believe him.
Right.
So, I got a slightly behind because I was in Tanzania in my Bible reading plans. I'm in Revelation right now, and I'm trying to track with it. I've read it many times. I have a huge book that gives 4 columns on every page, and they're the 4 different primary ways that people interpret Revelation. You can read them in parallel. I've read the book more than once. It's super challenging. I don't know. So let me simplify this, because this is just how I think. This is going to really make the Bible scholars here mad. Send me an email. You can send me an email directly at angie.frame@pccwire.net.
We don't do conflict by email.
Yeah, but we'll make an exception for you.
Okay.
Send all Revelation, all the Book of Revelations questions to Angie. I just did that for her. See what I did there?
Appreciate that.
Okay, so here's the whole point of John's Revelation. Are you ready? Jesus wins. Subtitle: You want to be with him. That's the whole Book of Revelation. John's Revelation the whole point of it is to say Jesus wins. Subtitle: You want to be with him. That's it. Now, figuring out all that stuff. And by the way, we spent 2 millennia trying to figure out when Jesus is coming back, when the end of time is coming. Every generation thought they were going to be the last, including this one. Mm-hmm. And who knows? I need to live every day like Jesus is coming back tomorrow. Every day like this will be my last day. And if I do that, if I can close my eyes at the end of every night and say, I gave this my best effort, I honored God in what I said and did all day long today, I reflected well on who Jesus is, and I'm ready, then that's a win. Mm-hmm. That's a win. So how about just make that your practice and stop obsessing about the remnant and the dragon.
Jesus teaches stories. Yeah. He tells parables about being ready.
Yeah.
And that's how we're supposed to live our lives. There was a question I thought I saw a minute ago, maybe I missed. Which disciple would you want to have dinner with?
Oh, wow. I missed that question.
I'm going to put this out there. When I was in seminary, I went on a trip to South Africa. It wasn't like a mission trip where you go serve much. It was a learning trip. And our professor, Dr. Oladipo, said of me on that trip, you remind me of this, of the disciple Andrew. We know like nothing about Andrew. So I would want to have dinner with Andrew because I want to know what in the world did my professor think I had in common with him, and just to know more about him.
Well, I would like to have dinner with Peter, and no one could
Ooh.
get a word in edgewise. He and I would just talk each other to death. Okay. All right, let's take this as our last question. We've down to 4 minutes and change. Why do you think so many pastors and leaders are falling away? There was a lot more to this question we may not want to tackle now. Okay, great. All right, sorry, I was reading our subtext from our translators. Why do you think so many pastors and leaders are falling away? Well, look, this will sound self-serving for me to say, but being a pastor, leading a church is super hard. Let me put it like this. We're authentic in all relationships. It's one of the things we value. We just tell the truth. I mean, it's okay. We just tell the truth. So, nobody around here is starving, but nobody around here is getting rich either. This is not the job you go into because you want to make a lot of money, and it's incredibly hard. It's really hard. Your people are hurting. And as a pastor, you care, so you're carrying a lot of those burdens, but you're also dealing in the most politically volatile environment that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And what's happening out there in the world has leaked its way into the church. So one of the things I do a lot is fight against the fight. Like, we are not here to draw political lines. We're not going to take that fight on. We're here because of our unity in Jesus. And it doesn't mean we don't take stands. What it does mean is that we're going to make the main thing the main thing. We're going to make sure we elevate what's really important. And I think for me, I think there's just a lot of weariness. Pastors get beat up. I don't know if you know this, but pastors and church leaders, they really get beat up. And if you don't, we developed a really good system here where we have support for each other and where we can raise a yellow flag or a red flag and say, I need a little bit of space, and where we've built in some time where we can reflect spiritually and reconnect with God and all that. But many churches just don't have that. And it's just hard. That's the real answer to the question. We still feel called. I mean, I love what I do, but that doesn't mean it's easy. What would you say to that?
Well, I would agree with that. And to that, I was thinking as I talked to some people this afternoon, as I interacted with some people and then heard from people on my phone, and there's a lot of affirmation and encouragement going around for me, for our whole church. And I just had a moment of gratitude because it is hard and there is a lot of weariness. But many of you, I assume, I don't know who's joining us, we have a culture here with a lot of encouragement. And that's not true for a lot of pastors and a lot of churches.
That's right.
And we have a strong team here. None of us is alone. And again, that's not true of a lot of pastors and a lot of churches. So I just want to say thank you to so many of you who are generous with your encouragement. It does mean a lot, and it's not something that everybody gets. Then a couple other notes I would make is, one, we're told in the Bible that leaders will be held to a higher standard.
That's right.
And so it's hard. We're told it's going to be hard. And I think sometimes it's not a surprise that people fall away from something that's hard. And I think there is always, with any sort of leadership position, there's always the tension of ego and pride.
That's right.
We know that pride is a sin. And again, I'm glad we have a team-based approach around here where we're supported and we tell the truth and we help each other and we can keep each other in check. And again, that doesn't exist in a lot of places, in a lot of churches. And I think it's a healthy part of our culture. But I think if unchecked, anybody in any position is capable of letting that sort of pride get away from them. And I think sometimes that happens too. Yeah. And I'm grateful to work at a place where we've got so much kind of built into the system to prevent that.
And shameless plug as we wrap up, and I'll wrap up this question. Something that's under the radar that most people don't know is that our church understands that we're not just about our church. I always say we're not in the empire building business, we're in the kingdom building business. So we invest in other pastors. We invest in other churches with time and leadership development and resources to help provide systems where many pastors just feel like they're hanging out there by themselves. They're beat up, they're burned out, and they're looking for somebody to come alongside them and say, well done, you got this. And we're doing that. Your church is doing that. And there are some pastors in the game that stayed in the game because you supported your church and we were able to support them. And you'll never know who those people are on this side of heaven. But I'd have it on Do Not Disturb. How did my alarm go off on Do Not Disturb? But we're able to support them, and I'm really proud of our church for that. Well, hey, thanks for giving us some time, for spending some time with us. We could do this every night for an hour for eternity and not answer all the questions. But the point is that we are asking them. We're willing to ask them. There's no question that's off limits, and we grow together in our faith because of it. So,
Yep.
thanks for spending some time with us